Welcome to Beyond the Next Chapter. I'm your host, Whitney Clark, and today we're diving into a new book from one of our favorites, author Ruth Ware. She's out with a new book called One Perfect Couple. Ruth is known for her psychological crime thrillers that includes the Woman in Cabin 10 and In a Dark, Dark Wood. She's been on bestseller lists all over the world and has sold more than 9 million copies of her books. Ruth, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about One Perfect Couple. What's it about? What can folks expect if they're just picking it up for summer?
So my elevator pitch, I guess. My main character, Lila, is a scientist. Her boyfriend, Nico, is an aspiring actor, and they're both getting to a bit of a crunch point in their career. Nico's kind of in his late 20s, and he's sort of starting to feel like if he hasn't made it now, he maybe won't get to. So one day he comes home with this amazing news. He's been invited to be on a brand new reality TV show. It could make or break his career. There's just one problem, which is that the show is called One Perfect Couple, and it's a couples TV show. You have to go on it as a couple. So would Lila like to come on this reality TV show with him? And Lila, this is very much not her bag, but she wants to be a good girlfriend, a supportive partner. So she says yes. They jet off to this stunning island in the middle of the Indonesian Ocean. It's white sand, turquoise seas. The reality TV show begins, but pretty quickly the weather starts to deteriorate. And one night, the crew, who are sleeping on a boat off the island, are all swept away in a huge storm. And when the contestants wake up the next day, the island is in bits. The desalination plant has been destroyed, so there's no fresh water. They have no electricity, very limited food. And the reality TV show tropes start to play out for real, but with much higher stakes. And Lila becomes aware that someone on the island is determined to survive this experience, no matter what the cost.
This gave me sort of Survivor vibes. What were some of the reality shows that you were inspired by while writing this?
Well, so I guess the show that I came up with in the book, One Perfect Couple, is a relationship-based reality show. So it's drawing on Survivor, but also things like, Love Island, Married at First Sight, very much things about what makes a good relationship, where do you find love, things like that. But the show that I personally was obsessed by, and which I think was one of the inspirations behind me writing the book, was The Traitors, specifically the UK version, which was a little bit different to the US version because we only had regular everyday contestants. We didn't have any pre-existing reality TV stars on our version. And I got completely fascinated by it. And for anyone who hasn't watched it, the premise is that there's like 20 contestants. The vast majority of them are what the show calls faithfuls, which means they're playing collaboratively. They're all trying to build up a prize pot. There's 3 contestants that the show calls traitors, and they are out for themselves. They are trying to fly beneath the radar, not be detected, throw suspicion on other contestants. And ultimately, if any of them get through to the final, they will take the whole pot. So it's a real kind of winner takes all situation. And the traitors didn't really influence the game show in my book, but I think where it did creep in was the plot. Because that's very much the dynamic that Lila discovers on the island. Most of the contestants are out to help each other. They're out to help everybody survive this terrible experience. But there's 1 or 2 people who are acting purely selfishly, and it's not always super easy to know who they are.
Mm-hmm. One of the aspects also of this TV show challenge is none of the contestants, and it's 8 couples. They can't have their cell phones or any technology. I read this and I was sort of panicking, thinking, oh my goodness, what would I do on an island without a phone, without any way to communicate with anyone? How do you think you would do in that situation if you didn't have technology like that on this island out, 20 hours, I believe it was off of the coast of Thailand?
I know, right? I would be absolutely in bits. I think the thing with my books is I'm always exploring kind of scenarios that scare me. And I think for any kind of modern day phone addicted person, which I most certainly am, the idea of being without your phone is the most terrifying thing because we rely on it for everything. But the fun thing was that that was a nugget of info that I stumbled over in my research. Originally, I didn't have that in the book. I just had it like, the storm had cut off communications. But when I was researching reality TV shows, it turns out that a lot of the shows that rely on a kind of sort of closed room kind of setup where the
Oh.
contestants are whisked off to somewhere, they do take away their devices. And that's because they want all of that emotional energy being directed back at the other contestants and back at the cameras. They don't want you phoning your mum and kind of being talked down. They want you stewing and coming back angry and taking it all out on camera. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, this is great. I'm going to steal this.
And at first, Lila has some hesitations, like any sort of normal person would. Why was it important for you to include that as part of her character as well?
I mean, I guess a bunch of different reasons. Lila is an outsider, and as a writer, that's like a really it's a really good place to start from, because if you have an outsider narrator, you have someone who can kind of act as the reader in terms of asking all the questions the reader does. They can remark on strange things, which for someone who was like a complete insider in the reality TV business, too many letters there, they, that would be stuff that they would take for granted, so they wouldn't naturally kind of notice it and remark upon it. So that was really useful. But also I think, all of my books are about kind of fears or phobias of my own, and I think one topic that I keep returning to, I probably just need therapy, is the idea of being trapped somewhere
Oh.
don't want to be. And that goes right back to my first book, In a Dark, Dark Wood, where my main character is dragged on a hen night that she would really rather not attend, but she feels a really strong sense of social obligation to go. And this is exactly the same. Lila doesn't really want to go on this show. She only does it because she wants to be a supportive girlfriend to her partner. And yet she's sort of stuck in this nightmare scenario that unfolds.
So basically, you're telling me the next time I don't want to do something, I can say, hey, you know what? I can't do this because I don't want to end up like someone in one of Ruth Ware's books. I mean, you just never know, right?
Absolutely. Or alternatively, you could do it and then write a novel about it. So, it's a win-win situation either way.
That is very true because in a lot of your books, it starts off like sort of this like idyllic situation. Like, oh my goodness, who doesn't want to go to this gorgeous, you know, uh, idyllic beach in off of the coast of Thailand, you know what I mean, in sort of like the middle of nowhere and enjoy for free. So it kind of they all start out in these sort of dream scenarios that quickly turn.
Yeah, something that seems too good to be true and maybe is.
What are some of your biggest fears? You just mentioned one, but what are they in a just the day-to-day life, and how does that transcend into your work?
I mean, I think a lot of my books are sort of pegged on my fears, and they're not kind of stuff that necessarily plagues me every single day, but it's stuff that you sort of worry about or wonder about. Like The Woman in Cabin 10, which was my second book. On the face of it, that book is about a murder on a cruise ship, but actually the kind of the emotional heart of the book is a woman who witnesses something terrible, truthfully says what she saw, and is not believed because of who she is, because of how much she had to drink. And I think that is something that most people have worried about, maybe particularly most women. What if something bad happens to me or a friend? I give truthful evidence about what I saw and I'm not believed. I know that that's something that's preyed on my mind in situations over the years. And, The Turn of the Key, that's about a kind of Henry James sort of setup of a woman going slowly crazy in a house that might or might not be haunted. But the kind of the emotional heart of the book is, what would happen if a child in my care came to harm? And I think that's something every babysitter, every parent, everybody who's ever had a small kid kind of under their responsibility. It's such a terrifying kind of 3 a.m. cold chills sort of yeah, concern. I have to say I've never really worried about being on a reality TV show principally because I've never applied to go on one. So that is a phobia, but it's not a very like realistic one. But probably the sort of the biggest fear of mine that made its way into the book is I'm quite scared of swimming in the sea. I do
Mm,
do it, but I really don't like it when you can't see the bottom. You know,
mm.
there's that feeling of it's totally irrational. Like, obviously, there isn't a giant squid down there waiting to wrap its tentacles around my ankle, but I can't stop thinking about but what if? And I gave that to I gave a more heightened version of it to one of the characters in the book. And there are quite a lot of scenes where the characters do have to swim in these very stormed, swept waters. And yeah, I think that was a little bit of my own kind of
I mean,
creeping
the
through.
riptide, the description of the riptides that you had in the book was also terrifying. Is it therapeutic for you to write about some of your fears and put your fears into some of these characters? I mean, without giving too much away, there's one character in particular that is especially terrified of the water.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I guess it is quite cathartic to take a fear and sort of work through it and think, well, what if this happened? How would I cope? A part of it with riptides is I don't think this is I live by the sea, so we grew up pretty well educated about the dangers of the coast, and actually it's not something I think a lot of people know about, and I've seen people get into trouble in the waters, and a little bit of me was maybe like, if I can put in a description of a riptide and what you should do when you get into one, maybe someone might remember it when they're in difficulties. But yeah, for sure, just kind of thinking about your fears and working through them in fiction is, I think, in some ways a really healthy thing to do.
I grew up in Southern California and grew up going to the beach my whole life. And I will tell you, I did not know that if you got caught in a riptide to swim horizontal, like swim along the shore. Is that correct? Is that a real tip we can take away from this?
Yeah, or to just not fight it, basically. If it's a clear day and you can see help's coming, you can often just ride it out. But yeah, the one thing you shouldn't do is swim against it. Try to swim directly back to shore, kind of, yeah, perpendicular to the beach, because you will tire yourself out before the
Yeah.
riptide does. Obviously, it depends how strong a swimmer you are and what the circumstances of the day are. But yeah, if you can, they're usually quite narrow. So if you can swim sideways, that's a safer thing to try to do.
You're so good at creating sort of these worlds where you become quite nervous and scared for some of these characters. You imagine yourself in these situations. What is your real life like? Because you seem like such a lovely, peaceful, pleasant person. Like, what is your real life like, and what is it like for you when you actually are going through the writing process?
I am. My real life is very kind of peaceful and pleasant. I live in a little village on the south coast of England, not touch wood, not very many bad things happen there, I hope. But, like everyone, not like everyone, but like most people, I spend a lot of time online. I think we're very exposed to the anxieties of the world these days. We have live footage of terrible things happening all around the globe in real time in front of our eyes, and it can be very easy to allow that to make you feel kind of helpless and despairing about the world. But I think in general, I think it's sort of a bit like the opposite of comedians. They say are always kind of famously dour when you meet them in real life because they spend their whole life being funny. So when they're like off the clock, they just don't want to crack a joke. I think in some ways crime writers are the opposite of that because we do spend all day thinking up, terrible what ifs and hopefully resolving them. And in some ways that is quite cathartic. It is quite therapeutic. It's funny, the only thing that I find really tough is most times I find it quite easy to shake myself out of a mood after a writing day. But the one thing that I find really difficult is when I'm writing arguments,
Oh.
particularly arguments between couples, and I'll finish writing and go downstairs and feel really annoyed and find myself snapping at my husband and my kids, and I sort of have to remember that that was all imaginary. No, nobody was being unreasonable to you. You just made that up. So yeah.
And in this book, so this must have been a doozy in your house because this is eight couples and none of them I mean, sorry to break it to everyone, no one in this book is perfect. There's no real perfect couple in this book. So, what was it like for you writing about the relationships in this book? Because there's a fair share of arguments between a number of the couples.
There are. I mean, I think it helped that all the couples in the book are at a very different stage of
Mhm.
life to me.
Yeah.
I'm, very happily married, have two teenage kids. The couples in this book are all kind of late 20s, early 30s. They're at a much more kind of crunch point in their relationship. So yeah, I would like to say, although funnily enough, my main character Lila, her job is very much lifted from my husband's real life job.
Oh,
He's a virologist. But the couple dynamics in the book are very much not based on my relationship.
phew.
But they,
Okay.
Phew, I know. Just I should have put that as like a disclaimer at the front. When they say like, no resemblance to characters living or dead. Also marriages of the writer. But definitely it reflects things that I've seen friends go through over the years, or talk to people about. And the title is, I mean, it's deeply ironic because absolutely, I don't think it's a spoiler to say there are no perfect couples in this book whatsoever. And I guess, like, going back to the sort of the big emotional kind of question at the heart of my books, one of the questions at the heart of this book is, what will people do for love, and
Mhm.
what makes a perfect relationship, and how different a relationship can look on the outside versus how it feels to be on the inside.
And at the beginning, Lila is really struggling with whether or not Nico is the right guy for her. And she sort of discovers that throughout the book. Again, with it's so hard to do this without giving spoilers, but I
I
feel like it's
know crime and
I
thrillers are the toughest genre to talk about. I really struggle with it in events. So yeah, we
but
won't give any spoilers today.
yeah,
It's
but
difficult.
I really try so hard not to give spoilers because I know as a reader, I mean, there's so much on your TBR list. The last thing you want to do is give anything away. But I don't think this next question will give anything away. What sort of research did you have to do in terms of reality TV? You mentioned earlier about the no phone thing. There was something in here about like therapists or counselors that talk to people to make sure they're mentally stable to be in these situations. Did you find that the case in real reality TV shows?
Yeah, so I talked to well, so first of all, I talked to a kind of bunch of TV producers, and actually several of them said, um, it's obviously a heightened version, but you should watch the TV show Unreal because, yes, it's very dramatized, and yes, they go to lengths in that you wouldn't in real life, but it's actually not a bad depiction of the sort of production side of reality TV and the way sort of some of the editing decisions are made. So that was fascinating. I didn't watch it all the way through because I could sort of tell. I hope this isn't a spoiler because I haven't seen the end, but it felt like it was kind of heading towards a murder or a crime. And I was like, okay, I don't want to watch that because it might be too close to my book. But the kind of the early details about sort of, how the shows are set up, the kind of roles that they're trying to get people to fall into, that was all fascinating. I read a brilliant biography by a woman called, autobiography, in fact, by a woman called Courtney Robinson, who was on The Bachelor, I want to say, called I Didn't Come Here to Make Friends. And that was brilliant. It was really funny. She was astonishingly frank about some of the stuff that went on
Mm.
behind the scenes. And I talked to a reality TV contestant who had been on The Traitors, who was really interesting. He'd signed an NDA, so he couldn't talk about any of the confidential stuff that happened on the show, but he was really interesting about the kind of the emotional side, and he felt very taken care of in terms of, the support that the show had given him. But that sort of gave me kind of fodder to think about what would happen if those building blocks weren't in place. Like, what if you were on a show where the producers weren't quite as responsible, weren't quite as caring about the contestants? How vulnerable would that make you feel? So that was really interesting.
Do you find there's a big difference between reality TV in the US versus in the UK? Like, do you guys have, I know that Love Island, I have a lot of friends that love Love Island. I can't say that I've watched a ton of it, but I know there's like so many versions of that show. Do you have any shows, again, as I mentioned, in the UK that are really popular that we don't have here, or vice versa?
Gosh, what a great question. Well, the funny thing is, I'm actually not a huge reality TV watcher, or I wasn't when I started writing this book. I watched the early series of Big Brother, which came
Mm,
out when
I
I was
rem
at college. Yeah.
I
And they
remember
were,
the first season. Yeah.
yeah, so different and so much more kind of just regular people doing this kind of weird social experiment. Um, and then I kind of fell away from that. I think because it all became much more heightened and more artificial, and it was much more kind of existing reality TV stars or people who are very clearly in it just to get famous. Um, and then I came back to it with The Traitors. I think because the UK version was what I had enjoyed about Big Brother, which was just regular, ordinary people. And they really did have a fascinating cross section. They had people from ages 18 to 80 and just a huge swathe of careers, ex-military, teachers, social workers. They had an aspiring magician, like just every kind of person you could imagine. And for me, I think that was much more interesting than some of the other shows are much more a very specific type of person, very beautiful kind of models and influencers. And, great for them, but I'm more interested in the kind of the full sort of human experience. But I think probably the biggest difference that I've noticed since researching this book um, is typified by the difference in the UK and US traitors. And that is the fact that it seems to me anyway, on the US scene, it's much more a closed ecosystem. It's all the same people going around the same shows, and you'll have, contestants from The Bachelor who go on to The Bachelorette,
Mm-mm, mm-hmm.
Real Housewives who go on to Celebrity Traitor, whatever it is. Whereas I feel like the UK ecosystems are a little bit more separate and they do tend to gravitate a bit more towards ordinary people, which is not, we still have Real Housewives of Chelsea and, whatever it is.
Oh,
So
really? Oh, that's so funny. So
Towie
I
we have, which I don't think you do. The Only Way is Essex, which is very funny. Yeah.
I remember watching the first season of Big Brother, the first season of Survivor, the first season of The Bachelor. I grew up watching The Real World, which was that was like one of the first real
Yeah,
reality
that was
TV shows.
that was I think that was probably the first, but I kind of stripped that out slightly because I feel like the difference with that was it was purely observational. There was no
Hmm.
kind of game. I think Big Brother and Survivor were the first ones who sort of gamified the concept and made it
Yeah.
into a contest in a way.
Yeah, the real world was just like drunken fights and like who's gonna, it was just, yeah, it was, that's absolutely what it was. I probably shouldn't have been watching that show when I was like 12, 13 years old, but I turned out okay. So that is fine. But it's funny that you mentioned influencers because that is some of the characters in this book are described as these beautiful people that are influencers. Is this the first time you've included like a quote unquote influencer in a book? And how has social media sort of changed the way you write about people in books?
Gosh, that is a great question. I'm trying to think if I've included influences in any of my other books. I don't think I have, which is interesting because I have always been very interested in kind of technology and how social media affects the way we deal with the world. Like One by One, which is my book about a group of people being picked off in a ski resort.
Oh yeah, that
There's
that one made
nothing
me
that ever
afraid to
like
go skiing too. So
do go skiing. It's great. You won't experience an avalanche. But that's like about a social media app that I made up that's kind of a sort of cross between Twitter and Spotify. It's sort of a musical app where you follow people. And there's a lot of questions in that about, privacy and kind of parasocial relationships and how much you know people from their kind of, choices they make online. And then the It Girl, the victim in that, April, is I guess a kind of proto influencer. And I was sort of trying to talk a little bit about the It Girls of the kind of early and mid noughties and the way the media in particular kind of built them up and then tore them down and sort of vilified them. And it's set in the year when Instagram just was starting up. So some of the characters have Instagram very early on and are sort of experimenting with posting photos and things. But yeah, I think this might be the first book where I've kind of put influencers more front and center as a theme. Yeah.
cool. So I know the Woman in Cabin 10 is going to become a movie with Keira Knightley. I just read that. That news just was official not too long ago. How does that process work? And what did you think when you found out, she's a big star, like she's a household name. What is that feeling like as an author?
Oh my gosh, I mean, it's been under option for a really long time. And obviously, you always hope that it's going to make it over the finishing line, but the film industry is such a weird business, even more bizarre than the publishing industry, which is saying something. So I'd been hearing rumblings that, it was getting closer and there was a script and blah, blah, blah. And then my film agent emailed and said, yeah, so Keira Knightley is attached. And I was
Wow.
like, wait, what? The Keira Knightley? And everyone was like, yes, Ruth, there is only one Keira Knightley, the Keira Knightley. But yeah, it was just, I mean, amazing news. I think she'll make an incredible. So at first I didn't know who she was attached to star as. And I thought it might be Carrie, just I don't know, that was where my head went. But I've since heard that it is Low. I think she will make an amazing Low. And I was thinking back, and I don't think she's been in a film that I haven't loved. Like she's just had a series of really clever, interesting, funny picks. So yeah, I'm very excited.
That is so exciting. And we, of course, I mentioned this before we actually started recording, but The Woman in Cabin 10 is one of the books that got me really into reading again years ago. It just was, couldn't put it down. It's something that I would recommend to people if they are wanting to get back into reading. If someone is just now becoming familiar with your books, we of course want them to read One Perfect Couple, but where should they start? Like, should they start with one of your books? Does it matter? Are you just kind of, pick a description and whatever kind of is suits your fancy that day, I suppose?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the good thing about my books is that they're all standalone, so you don't need to read them in any order. I guess if someone was being a complete purist, they might want to start with In a Dark, Dark Wood, which was my first thriller, and kind of follow it through. You probably see my weird obsessions kind of growing and shifting throughout the novels if you do it that way. But yeah, there's absolutely no right or wrong way to read my books. And I would say just go by the descriptions. They're all very different in terms of style, setting, murder on a cruise, murder on a desert island, murder at an Oxford college. The only thread is probably murder. So yeah, I would just go with whatever grabs your fancy. If you've always wanted to attend Oxford, go for the It Girl. If you've always wanted to be on a reality TV show, or if that's your worst nightmare, go for One Perfect Couple.
What do you want people to know, or is there anything else you want people to know about One Perfect Couple or any of the other books?
I don't think so. I sort of try not to tell people what I think they should take away from my books. I think the
Mm.
wonderful thing about writing books, particularly, maybe as opposed to TV and film, is that it's really such a collaborative thing. 50% of the book is what's on the page, but 50% is what the reader brings to it. And I always love getting messages from readers giving me their take on things. And often it's wildly different to what I'd intended. Every time I put out a casting call, sort of saying like, who would you cast as blah, 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 the people suggested are often so far away from the physical description I thought I was giving. But that's the amazing thing about books. You bring your own experiences, your own, imagination, your own interpretation to the page. And so much of the book belongs to the reader that I just think whatever people find there is great.
We know again this book is the focus now, but how soon after this do you start working on the next one? Do you already have a plot in mind for your next book? How does that work with you?
I am writing my next book at the moment. Normally, I would be happy to talk about it, but this one happens to be a secret project, so I
Oh,
can't. All I can
okay.
say is watch this. You can follow me on social media, and no doubt I will be posting about it then when I'm allowed to.
Yay. Well, Ruth, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your time in New York City. One Perfect Couple is out now, and we so appreciate you being on the podcast. It was so fun to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah.